Okay, good afternoon. We're just letting a few more folk in and then we'll be ready to start. So, a big hello and a welcome to the third of our fifth presentation on the subject of Blitz 80, which marks the 80th anniversary since Belfast suffered a number of appalling airstrikes during May and June of 1941. Today's topics is the subject is called Putting the Pieces Together, and it's going to be three short, sharp presentations, and all presentations will be sort of looking at artifacts and objects and archives that are available, which relate to the Blitz itself, and the artifacts in question are all in the possession of a Northern Ireland screen, the Northern Ireland War Memorial, and the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. I should also add that this series is being organised on behalf of the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland War Memorial, and as of today, the Northern Ireland Screen as well. So we have three guests from each of those organisations, and the running order is going to be our first guest is going to be Ann Donnelly, who is going to introduce a quick clip. And then Anne is going to disappear. Anne should be back at the end, but we will then listen to Alan Freeburn from the Northern Ireland War Memorial. And Alan will pass on to Janet Hancock from PRONI. And Janet will then pass back to Anne from our Northern Ireland screen at the end. And it should all take about 45 minutes, and there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please, as you would normally do, write them in the chat, and we will come to you at the end of the after the last presentation. Thank you. So it's my pleasure to ask Anne to come and play us a very quick and brief video. Thank you.
Two more explosions boomed on the far side of the city. The guns were silent, then beautiful, exploding with a faint pop in the sky above them. A magnesium flare floated up in the stillness, lighting the rooftops in a ghostly silver.
Okay, Alan, if you want to take over at that stage.
Yeah, no problem. So thanks everybody for logging in on what is actually a really nice day today. I'm sure plenty of you would rather be outside. So thank you very much for joining us. I don't want to keep you back for too long. I'm very conscious that Janet and Anne are yet to follow me as well. So those of you who noticed that I'm not Jenny Haslett. So Jenny's actually at an antenatal appointment today. So she's asked me to fill in. I am the collections officer at the War Memorial Museum. And what I'll be doing is give you a very quick history of the War Memorial, just to give a bit of context. And then I'll be talking to you about the Blitz related sources and items that we have in our collection. So first of all, history. The War Memorial sort of can be traced back to a government fund, sort of Northern Ireland Stormont Parliament Fund back in 1943. They wanted to have a memorial to those killed in action, but also on the home front from Northern Ireland. That, at the same time, the British Legion had a War Memorial Fund. So those two funds decided they were best served by amalgamating. So they amalgamated in 1948. Enough money wasn't raised until the early 60s, when an act of parliament would enable Belfast Corporation to grant a plot of land to the War Memorial Fund when our building opened in October 63. We then moved site in 2006 to Talbot Street, and we were awarded museum accreditation in 2013. And we are at the minute Northern Ireland's only accredited Second World War home front museum. Within our collection, we have probably just over 5,000 items relating to the Belfast Blitz, the American presence in Northern Ireland, the industry, the role of women, the Home Guard, the Royal Air Force, and as well as a small First World War collection as well. So the image on the left, you will see then some of you will recognise as High Street in Belfast, looking down towards the Albert Clock. Where that pile of smouldering rubble is on the left-hand side of the image, that was an area damaged in the Blitz in 1941, and became cleared and became known as an area called Blitz or Blitzed Square. And it was actually there that the Northern Ireland War Memorial Building Fund originally were based. So the image on the right is from the same picture, same place, from a different angle. We were originally based in 3 converted corporation tram cars, and you can see on the right there's some sort of appeal going on. Probably the great and the good are there giving speeches with a small crowd watching on. So we very much have our foundation and our origins in Blitz. When the War Memorial Building was constructed, it was to the back of Blitz Square on Warren Street. So, as I said, very quick history. I want to talk now about what sources we have in the museum collection. So, the sources sort of roughly can be divided into 3 sort of categories. You have the before or the preparations of the Blitz, experiences of the Blitz, and then the Blitz cleanup or the aftermath of the Blitz. And the first item I want to highlight is this map. So this map is entitled, you see at the top of the screen, is entitled Stad Plan Vaughan Belfast, which translates to City Map of Belfast. And it is an original Ordnance Survey map of the city. You'll recognise the River Lagan flowing into Belfast Lough. It is an original taken on by the German or Luftwaffe intelligence and overlain or overdrawn in hand the major targets and landmarks in the city. So you see the major roads are identified in yellow, the major railway sidings. So you have what's Adelaide, Great Victoria Street, the BCDR, LMS station, Victoria Barracks, Palace Barracks, Stormont is identified, City Hall is identified, Inst is identified. All the heavy industries and the docks are identified. So you have Harland and Wolff, Schwartz and Harland, Ranks Flour Mill, the Harbour Power Station, what is RAF Sydenham or George Best Belfast City Airport today over here as well. The waterworks in North Belfast are also identified. And those of you who are quite keen-eyed, you notice, I know it's quite hard to see on this screen, but you will notice there's lots of little purple dots along the rivers in West Belfast and along the rivers in East Belfast, such as the Collinswater here. Those are the purple dots. They are textile mills as well. So it gives an indication of the level of detail that the Germans are putting in to help the Luftwaffe identify targets and landmarks in the city. Now, initially, you look at this source. This is a route map and guide to the Belfast City Tramways. Initially, you might think it might have very little to do with the Belfast Blitz. It gives timetables and a bit of indication or the stop details of the old tram network in Belfast. But if you look closely, it's been retitled to Route Map and Guide to the Air Raids. This is probably one of my favorite items in the museum collection, just because of the color of it. It's not a large item, it folds out. This is the other side of it. And it's been annotated to show the damage to the tram network as a result of the Easter Tuesday raid on the 16th of April, 1941, and as a result of the fire raid on the 4th and 5th of May, 1941 as well. So you see different marks along the tram network around the city. It just shows how much, although people may not have been directly affected by the Blitz, but it continued, like they were obviously then inconvenienced by the effect of the Blitz after as well. We also hold in the collection a Luftwaffe magazine. It's entitled Der Adler. So it is basically translates to the eagle. So it is, as I said, a Luftwaffe magazine. And you notice here on the front cover, on the top right corner, it is dated 27th of May, 1941. So inside that, there is a page dedicated to Belfast. You'll see of reconnaissance photos of the harbour, or what we know today as the harbour estate. And you see on top is the before photo, and the bottom photograph, much larger photograph, is the after photo following the fire raid and the raid after on 5th and 6th of May, 1941. So it talks about damage done to different targets in the city where different buildings are still smouldering when these reconnaissance photos were taken. Waiting for the slide to jump forward. There we go. So as well, what a real treasure we hold in our archive is this. It's a thesis for a Queen's University Belfast thesis produced in 1952. It's a geography thesis, and you can see it's entitled Utilisation of Blitz Sites. Now, although it's more from the angle and more framed from the angle of urban redevelopment and part of the New Towns project of the 1950s into 1960s. It is probably one of the first studies of the physical scars left on the city of Belfast. So within it, there are quite extensive appendices, and in these appendices, the whole city is mapped, and it's mapped right down to the individual building on each street in Belfast. So here you see a glimpse of that. It's color. You see the key in the bottom right-hand corner. Those sites outlined in red were still vacant 11 years later in 1952. Sites outlined in yellow were rebuilt exactly as before, or for the same purpose anyway. And those in blue were rebuilt differently. So that's maybe housing or a row of houses rebuilt for commercial or industrial purposes, or vice versa. So the level of detail in this thesis is unparalleled for how the city and individual streets were affected. Not only does it map the streets, but it also lists them as well. So here, for example, you can see on Academy Street, it lists the number of premises damaged from numbers 1 to 9, 55 to 67, 81 to 89, and 4 to 28. And that gives a total number of 30 bomb premises on Academy Street alone. So there really is no comparable source for this in one place. And at the minute, we are actually involved with a project, again, with Queen's University Belfast Geography Department, called Mapping the Blitz. And part of this is taking that 1952 thesis and overlaying it over modern satellite imagery, but also then using aerial photography, also taken in the 50s, and with the Stadplan von Belfast, the Luftwaffe Ordnance Survey map, and correlating and plotting this damage on these outlines, as you can see on the right, as to give it a new visual overview of how Belfast was affected by the Belfast Blitz. As part of that, there will also be, the victims will also be mapped. So I will talk a little bit more about that next week when I am giving a talk on the victims of the Belfast Blitz and how they, and what parts of the city they were killed in. So these letters, we were very privileged to have these letters on loan to the museum a number of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now. They are letters written by the Poor Clare sisters, who were based on they had a convent there on the Cliftonville Road in North Belfast. And these letters were written after the fire raid on the 4th and 5th of May. And in these letters, they talk about how they spent the night praying, or how they could hear the bombs falling nearby, and how the glass shattered, and how their statues were toppled in their garden, and how they slept under the table on mattresses during the raid. But there's also an incredibly humorous story. I'm not entirely sure if it's humorous or if it's real. But the anecdote goes that they explained that people from the Shankill believed that the Italian Air Force, the Regia Aeronautica, were actually bombing Belfast, and that it was the Pope in the lead plane that was dropping the bombs on Belfast. So whether or not that is word for word what people actually thought, or whether it's a humorous sort of story or anecdote they're trying to tell, it's hard to tell, because the rest of the letter is very serious. So it's very difficult, but it's one I'd never heard before until I'd seen these letters, and it's one that always sticks in my mind as well. Some of you might recognize this photograph. It's a Belfast Telegraph photograph of Shandara Park in North Belfast. And you'll see the house across the road as received a direct hit. But this item, this collection I'm going to talk about now, is more to do with the house facing the house that took a direct hit. So where the car is parked here in the street, it's the house where that car is parked outside. So that house was number 10 Shandara Park. And although this collection might seem very boring and very very mundane, it's actually incredibly useful, incredibly insightful source into the Belfast Blitz. So this was donated to us, I think, 3 years ago, and it came in a big binder, and it's all the paperwork associated with the rebuilding and repairing of this gentleman's house. So you see in this, there are invoices, there are receipts, there are insurance policies, and lots of correspondence to and from banks and to and from the War Damage Commission, and talking about how they're rebuilding their house. And it's full of things that you wouldn't even think of. So you see these photographs of the Belfast Blitz, and it's all bricks and mortar and all very heavy items that have been destroyed, and it all stands all very clunky. But when it came to rebuilding people's properties, people's homes, these invoices show things like curtain poles, underlay for carpets, and it's always very menial and mundane things that you just don't think about. So it's a fascinating insight, and not only into how people rebuilt after the Belfast Blitz, but also into the social and sort of economic history of the city. Especially you see a number of the receipts. You see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's one from Anderson and Macaulay. In the middle there, there's Marshall and Montgomery. So it gives a real insight into that. For this one house alone, they received compensation of £227 and 10 shillings. And I did a quick calculation before we came on here today, and that according to the National Archives website, that corresponds to just under £8,100 in modern money. And that was just for that one house, and that one house did not receive a direct hit either. Starting to think about wrapping up now. At the minute, we have for a number of years, we've had an ongoing oral history project. And for any of you who have heard me speak before, you're probably bored of hearing me bang on about this, but this is an incredibly important project to the Northern Ireland World, because we realise that it's now or never, essentially, for collecting these stories, because these stories are still within living memory. And sadly, maybe for the next 5, 10, 15 years, they no longer will be. So it's really one of our major focuses at the minute. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share some clips of our oral history project. The first one's just over 2 minutes long, and the second one's just under 5 minutes. So the first one here is the gentleman on the left. His name is William Gooding, and he is the son of Horace William Gooding, who was actually the chief area warden of Belfast during the Blitz. So hopefully my sound here will work. Hopefully I remember to hit the right button.
The night, a few weeks later, the message came through at just after midnight that there was a raid on the way. Apparently it had been picked up by the radio scanners somewhere, probably in Wales, because the planes came up the Irish Sea from Brest, about 200 of them, Ju-88s, which looked as if they had been made of corrugated iron. There was corrugations in the plates and on the wings, but they had 3 engines, and the engines, the 2 engines on the wings, ran at a different speed from the bigger engine on the nose. So when they approached, they didn't sound a steady note, but ooh, like that. And they came in over Carrickfergus and flew along the edge of the escarpment, the hill past Knocka, and they came to Belfast over what is now the zoo, and started dropping their bombs there. And where we lived, in Lismoyne Park, the first bombs landed behind us, and the next set of bombs landed more towards the Cave Hill Road. And I do remember hearing the warden shouting, "There's another of those terrible things above us." And it was a 5-ton aerial mine on a parachute, and it was getting lower and lower, and it drifted over our house and landed in Sunningdale Park, where it blew the fronts off a considerable number of houses.
So the next account you will hear is from the gentleman on the picture on the right-hand side, and his name is Roy Henderson. Now, Roy Henderson actually lived on Sunningdale Park during the Belfast Blitz, and the following clip is just under 5 minutes long, and this is his account of what happened on that night.
She died in 1940, and my father and I lived with the aid of a housekeeper until the house was bombed, and then there was no house to keep. Well, as was the custom, my father and I, on Easter Tuesday, 1941, as was the custom, we settled ourselves under the stairs and the house next, we were number 5, number 7 suffered a direct hit, and fortunately our staircase, fortunately neither my father nor I was injured. We were sitting in a little cloakroom under the stairs, and we could hear bombs dropping all around us, one bomb every couple of minutes. Well, when the bomb actually struck, the strange thing was that everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The house collapsed in slow motion. The stairs held up and we walked out from under the stairs. My father and I then went for a walk. We walked out and we went then for a walk. This was the top of the Cave Hill Road, and we went for a walk along the North Circular Road, admiring the bombs as we walked. A heap of rubble. And I must tell you this, we had a fox terrier, and the bomb was on Tuesday night, Easter Tuesday night, and on Sunday following, I was scrambling over the rubble to see if there was anything worth saving, and I heard scratching below my feet. So, with the aid of some others, I started digging, and that was Sunday. I started digging, and out scrambled our little dog, as good as new, took a drink of water, wagged his tail, and that was that. Tuesday night was the bomb. Sunday afternoon, we let the dog, we found the dog. That's still alive.
Amazing.
His name was Mac, and he went to live in Oma with my stepmother's sister, and if a loud bang happened anywhere near him, he would run upstairs and hide under the bed.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people felt like doing that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Gosh, and did you manage to find anything in the rubble apart from the dog?
No.
So does that mean that you have no belongings predating?
I had only what I stood up in.
Yeah.
I stayed under the stairs. Well, every now and then I was daft enough to go up into the roof space, open the skylight, look out, and all I could see was Old Park Road in flames. And I soon stopped doing that and kept down onto the stairs. And my next door neighbours in number 7 were a family called Simon, and father, mother, and younger son, aged about 18, were, well, they were just blown to pieces, so to say. Older son, aged in his early 20s, returned from his honeymoon that very morning with his new wife to find his house gone and his parents and his only brother all wiped out.
So there we have 2 accounts of what happens on Sunnydale Park, just off the Cave Hill Road in North Belfast. Whoops. What was that? Next. So this is actually a Belfast Telegraph image of Sunnydale Park, and just as William Gooding said, the parachute bomb came down and ripped the front off houses all along the street, and killed, as Roy Henderson mentioned, the 3 members of the Simon family that lived there. So for those who are, like, you can see this photograph, there's an air raid warden here in a white hat, and that air raid warden is actually a James McCord. So James McCord was not only just an air raid warden, he was also the Master of Art at Methodist College, Belfast. And we actually hold his diary in the museum collection as well. It's very short and brief, but also it provides a great insight into how busy and sort of things that he experienced during the Belfast Blitz as well. So just want to finish up by pointing out a couple of things. First of all is that after the fire raid anniversary in the next couple of weeks, on the 4th and 5th of May, we will be launching a walking tour, a self-led walking tour of the Belfast Cathedral Quarter, starting at the Northern Ireland War Memorial and ending at Belfast City Hall. So it'll be available on our website, and it's done in partnership with the Ulster Museum. So you'll be able to pick up copies at the Ulster Museum or at the webs or at the Northern Ireland War Memorial, or you'll find it on our website as well. So it's pictorial, uses quite a lot of those Belfast Telegraph images, as well as images from our collection and the Ulster Museum collection. But you can also scan the QR code in it, and you can pop your headphones in, and it will talk you through the events of Easter Tuesday and the fire raid in 1941. So just want to finish off by saying that obviously you're all here today because you all have an interest in the Second World War in Northern Ireland or the Belfast Blitz. And I'm sure you've all done a spot of Googling in the past, a search, look for something, look something up. And I'm sure you've all came across a certain website that pops up quite a lot. I just want to start with the end of the warning that this website is a lot of style over substance as such. This website is very much copied and pasted and taken from other websites, such as the Imperial War Museum or the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. You'll never see on this website any records consulted from the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland or from the National Archives at Kew either. So I just want to finish with a spot of encouragement that if you are doing some research, or if you're looking into aspects of the Belfast Blitz, Second World War in Northern Ireland, that do get in touch with places like the Public Records Office, the NI Screen, Ulster Historical Foundation, Northern Ireland War Memorial, or even any other local museum, like your local museum. They will hold local stories, they will hold items, they will hold artifacts, all relating to people. Because if these people aren't used and don't get the credit that for being the custodians of these items and these stories, and they don't have the visitor numbers, or they don't have received inquiries, such there's a fair chance that they won't exist in the future if they don't get the credit they deserve. So you need to go to the original source and use them, because even though it's very quick and handy to have a quick Google of things, always try and get to the original source of something, because that's where the real stories lie, and where you'll find the most help as well, and the most people who are most factual or most knowledgeable on the subject also. So before I get into a rant, I'm going to pass on to Janet Hancock from PRONI, and she'll talk about the Belfast Blitz related collections that they hold in the Public Records Office in Titanic Quarter.
Thank you, Alan. I am just going to cross my fingers the tech works and share my screen here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So that was a really nice handover, actually, because I am excuse me, I am just going to be giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the types of material that we do have available in the Public Record Office. So just for anybody that's not familiar or hasn't been, PRONI is the official archive for Northern Ireland. We were established in 1923 as the official repository for archives, and we collect the records of government departments and public bodies. And also, quite uniquely, we also collect records deposited by private individuals and organisations. And whilst the majority of PRONI's archives relate to northern counties of Ireland, our collections do reflect global ties between people here and with the rest of the world, as I was delighted to see so many overseas visitors in the audience today. So as you can see, we're located in Belfast historic Titanic Quarter. The astute amongst you will see the well-known Harlot and Wolf cranes, and we're actually basically sitting pretty much on in and around one of the blitzed areas here. So PRONI holds over 3 million records, and I suppose an archive can range from anything from a single piece of paper, a photograph, to collections which literally span hundreds of boxes. So that could be anything from the ledger of a corner shop right up to the vast collection of the Harlot and Wolf shipyard. Archives can be anything from official files, letters, diaries, photographs, registers such as church and school registers, maps, land and property records, landed estates, wills, other business records. And they come in a wide range of mediums, from paper, parchment, microfilm, and more recently digital records, including the audiovisual, which you'll be seeing a bit more of in Anne's presentation. So when we opened in our building in Titanic Quarter, our opening exhibition, A Century of Change, Conflict and Transformation, actually had a central focus on the Blitz. And so PRONI is not currently open to the public due to the COVID restrictions, but hopefully as things start to ease, we will start to be reopening the building again. So what I'm going to be talking to you about hopefully will be things that some of you will be able to come down and have a look at yourself once we reopen to the public. So this exhibition isn't on display in PRONI anymore, but actually the Blitz and Second World War section have gone on loan to the Ulster Aviation Society, and when they reopen post-COVID restrictions, you'll actually be able to see a bit of that material on their site, which is at Maze outside Lisburn. So at the outbreak of war, the Northern Ireland government was facing a wide range of challenges, from rising unemployment, persistent lack of clear information on which to base policy, financial uncertainty, an ailing Prime Minister, James Craig, who died in 1940 and was replaced by John Miller Andrews. A lack of appreciation within government that Northern Ireland could be bombed, and a bit of sort of complacency and indifference amongst the population as to whether or not this would actually happen. And this is an example of the diary of Wilfred Sprender from PRONI's collection. He was head of the NI Civil Service. And if you can see there, he's talking about, this is in 1939, and he's talking about sort of our vulnerability and air raid precautions. And again, this is another example of correspondence in our Ministry of Finance records. And just as you're watching here, the PRONI record references are at the bottom of some of these documents, and a lot of these are from some of the core collections relating to Blitz and Second World War. So if you see anything that interests you, just make a note of those record references. And this basically is saying, you know, owing to its retired position, Northern Ireland would not be likely area for attack were it not for the location of certain very important war industries and harbour facilities. And that, of course, was, you know, Harland and Wolff and their construction, sort of tank construction you can see here, and the production of Sterling bombers. And as Alan mentioned, you know, there was evidence, or there is evidence in the files, that there was German reconnaissance. This photograph, reconnaissance photograph of Belfast from 1940 demonstrates that actually there was German airborne activity, but there was little serious effort made to bolster either Belfast or Derry Londonderry's anti-aircraft defences. And again, the preparedness was severely lacking in terms of resources, and this is just an example of Cabinet Committee minutes, again found in the PRONI archives, which are sort of an ongoing, you're still into sort of 1940s, a bit of uncertainty and a bit of you know, prevarication as to what was necessary and whether there was enough, or whether money would be spent or wouldn't be spent. So I'm just going to start off just having a whistle stop around the sort of the earlier part, starting with a bit of air raid precautions and some of the material we have. So the air raid, the ARP services started in 1938, and you can see evidence, for example, this from City and Borough of Belfast. This is from the local authority archives. Belfast was subdivided into 7 districts. There were 300 wardens posts, and it was divided into sectors based on sort of number of people per sector, and there were over 5,500 wardens on duty. And the city was sort of that was the estimated need, and you can see some of these lovely sort of preparatory maps. And advice and information on preparation and organisation of the air warden service. So an air warden was responsible member of the public who had two main duties. First was to report any air raid damage to the authorities and call for help in the event of an attack. And the second was to advise people in his or her area of air raid risks and precautions. However, air raid wardens did find themselves with a varied range of tasks throughout the war. And again, we have some lovely images here. And then you had larger organisations such as Shorts, who would have had their own sort of ARP drilling, and you can see there some lovely photographs from the Shorts collection showing them sort of doing ARP drilling in 1940. And again, collecting for sort of funds for ARP. You can see some fundraising in the mobile canteen and in various sort of programming for both sort of, there's a couple of examples from East and West Belfast. So part of the precautions was, for example, encouraging the carrying of gas masks. And you can see a little bit of sort of what the recommendations were. But in reality, I suppose there was fairly little consideration given by the general public to the thought that Northern Ireland might be bombed, and blackout rules were often broken. Very few people in the grand scheme of things carried their gas masks, and the evacuation schemes were fairly poorly implemented, and turnout wasn't great. But in relation to the gas masks, as you saw on the previous slide, encouragement to wear gas masks, and then as in true, I was going to say Northern Ireland style, but I suppose really everywhere style, for everybody saying, you know, not wanting to do something. We have some lovely examples from these, again, local authority records, and the one on the right here is from somebody, I'll just read it out. Somebody from Marilyn Village, which is outside Lurgan, and saying, "Dear sir, it's quite all right reading about your air raid precautions, but I wish to draw your attention to the county folk belonging to Marilyn that no one seems to bother about. Why are gas masks not distributed here? Are we to stick our heads in a hole if an air raid attack is on?" And then they go on to say, do you not think it's going to blow down the country? So there's some really sort of personal correspondence in there, which is really quite interesting. And as I mentioned, some evidence of evacuation of children, and you can find this evidenced in things like school registers as well, for example. And I think, you know, there was a lot of that complacency had set in, because a lot of places in the mainland, in mainland Britain, had been quite heavily bombed by the stage the Luftwaffe came to Belfast. And I think there was a bit, whilst there had been evacuation at the start, there was a bit of drift back, and parents didn't want to be parted from children, etc. So the evacuation probably was not as well taken up prior to the Blitz than it could and should have been. And again, we mentioned blackout. Again, ironically, there was lots of information about blackout, but ironically, there was almost as many deaths due to blackout than there was due to the Blitz, and that was from things like car accidents and just general, you know, because people couldn't see and were being hit by cars and falling over things when they were out and about in the dark. So it's one of those the sort of ironies of the hazards of actually the air raid precautions. Shelters were another air raid precaution, and again you can see we have letters relating to air raid shelters and the provision of air raid shelters. We have some evidence of the types of shelter. Now, Anderson shelters is probably one of the better known, although there weren't a huge amount of Anderson shelters actually deployed here. One of the other ones is Morrison shelter, and again, you know, these were quite scary looking and almost coffin-like, but another example of, you know, designed to try and keep any debris off the people inside. And then again, you have organizations making their own provision for their workers. So that's an example of a shelter built at Shorts in 1940. And again, there's evidence. Here's a little example from one of the PRONI files about some plane activity over Belfast in the run up to, so that's sort of looking from January, February, from December 1940, September 1940, just sightings flowing over Bangor Bay, dropped 22 incendiaries. So you can see how the sort of concern would have been starting to mount at this stage. And I suppose despite that, it came as a surprise to both government and citizens when a squadron of German bombers raided Belfast on the night of the 7th to 8th of April in 1941 and inflicted major damage on the docks. And on the return, the bomber crews reported that Belfast defences were inferior in quality, scanty and insufficient, which led them to return on Easter Tuesday, bombing on the evening of the 15th of April, when 180 German bombers began an attack in Belfast. The full brunt of the attack was not only taken by the industrial heartland, but also by congested housing on the New Lodge, Lower Shankill and Antrim roads. 1:45 a.m. a bomb fell at the corner of East Bridge Street and Oxford Street, wrecking the city's central telephone exchange and cutting off all contact with Britain and the anti-aircraft operations control room. So for a further two hours, the Luftwaffe attacked Belfast pretty much unopposed. I'm sorry, I'm going to rattle through these because I've a good few quite pictorial slides. Again, this is a message from the Ministry of Public Security, giving a situation report on the 16th of April at 1800 hours. Casualties at that point were being noted as 323 killed, probably others, 329 seriously wounded. So by the following morning, the scale of the devastation really had become apparent. And as the day sort of went on, official death figures started to put the death toll up into the 700s. But actually the actual figure, as we sort of now know, is probably well over 1100. And it wasn't just Belfast. There were other incidents elsewhere, in Derry, Londonderry, Bangor, Newton Ards and Green Island. And here's an example. So this is courtesy of the North Down Museum, but you can see the attack and the sort of devastation in Hazeldean Gardens in Bangor. And if anybody's interested, there was a really interesting article in the Derry Journal, I think last week, which gave a really quite a good synopsis of the damage that was inflicted in Messines Park in sort of Derry, Londonderry as a result of that attack, where I think it says killing 12. I think there were actually maybe 15 killed in that raid as well. So you can have a wee look at that if you want to follow up a little bit more. So here's just I'm just going to whiz through, and these are some examples just of the devastation which actually took place in the Antrim Road tramway, which I know Alan had mentioned, the tram infrastructure, North Street, York Road, and again a bit of that sort of wartime spirit coming out. You can see a bit of rallying of the troops while the background is in devastation. Parachute mine over the Cliftonville area, and the auxiliary fire service in York Street taken on the 17th of April. So in the run up to the war, it had been recognised that the Northern Ireland fire brigades would be totally inadequate to deal with any issues arising if there were to be a raid. So therefore in 1938, 200 volunteers had formed the Belfast Fire Brigade Auxiliary Reserve, which later became the Auxiliary Fire Service, and they trained with the Belfast Fire Brigade under the control of its fire officers. And wardens were rescuing casualties as well as assisting with the putting down of fires. And indeed, you know, that there was a call for assistance, and reinforcements came from both the mainland and Eire, the Republic of Ireland, dispatched pumps up to aid the firefighters in Belfast. This is just a wee bit of correspondence relating to that assistance by the Dublin Fire Brigade. I suppose one of the most interesting bits of our collection around this are those personal stories. Really fascinating run of diaries by Emma Duffin, who had been a nurse in the First World War and sort of came to the rescue after the Blitz. And she notes, in I suppose, the inadequacy of preparations became starkly obvious on the 15th and 16th of April. And this sort of ranged from the lack of appropriate rescue equipment right down to the fact that the mortuaries were full to capacity, and as a result St George's Market had to be used as a temporary morgue. And Emma Duffin writes about this in her diary in this page, and she goes on to note about her former experience in hospital, and that had been nursing in the First World War. Should have prepared me to a certain extent, but nothing I'd ever seen was as terrible as this. I went to the market. Will I ever be able to bring myself to buy flowers and vegetables there again? The place was full of coffins. And again, this is part of the PRONI collection, but there's a really good publication by Trevor Parkhill, the First World War Diaries of Emma Duffin. So if anybody wants to find out a little bit more about Emma, fascinating diaries. And again, this is just some other information just on the devastation caused by those attacks. So that wasn't the last attack. On the 9th of Sunday the 4th and Monday the 5th of May, the bombers returned for what turned out to be the last time, bombing the harbour, shipyard and aircraft factory, as well as the lower Newton Arch Road and part of the city centre around High Street, Donegal Street and Rosemary Street. Around 100,000 incendiary bombs were dropped, followed by high explosive, and as Alan mentioned, this often known as the fire raid. Although this time the death toll was a bit smaller, because a large number of people had fled to the countryside as a result of the previous attack. And again, this is just one of the examples. A lady called Moya Woodside, who was part of the mass observation project. And again, some examples of what she was seeing on the way past some of these Blitz sites. And a situation report here, late on Wednesday, 14th of May, bodies were being discovered for the last 10 days afterwards. And that's a situation report from Westburn Street. And we also, I don't have a slide of it, but we have a really interesting diary written retrospectively from a gentleman who was manning the church boiler house in the area was being used as a shelter basically for everybody in the whole community. And he tells some really poignant stories. For example, he talks about a local midwife, and he'd seen her earlier in the day passing, and the sirens were going, and he'd said, come in, and she said, no, I'm going to attend to somebody, I'm going to attend to a pregnant lady. And that was the last time he ever saw her, because she didn't survive the Blitz. So those really sort of localized poignant stories are a fantastic resource. And again, I talked about the international connections. We have things like a sympathy telegraph coming across from the Canadian government in Toronto. So I'm just keeping an eye on time here. I'm going to rattle through these. And again, I'm just going to sort of more or less finish off by some examples of some of the fantastic images we do have in no particular order. So this is High Street in May 1941, Bridge Street Junction, Donegal Street, and you can see the utter devastation here. And this sort of, I suppose, after the raids, really sort of witnessed a bit of a mass exodus out of the city. And people were needed, sort of all of these displaced people needed shelter and food and clothes after the trauma. And I think one of the other things that became evident was the sort of levels of deprivation in these areas of huge sort of congested housing, and equally the fear factor. People were leaving Belfast and they were going and sleeping in the hills and sleeping in parks out of fear of raids, and equally this in its own right was also causing major issue to sort of health and welfare. By the end of May 1941, over 200,000 people had left the city, and many who were in the city were choosing to sort of flee as sort of darkness fell. And again, just some examples, little summaries of the sort of devastation which had occurred. And this little table just shows you about, extent of damage, and it's breaking it down into houses which were damaged, offices and building premises, industrial premises, So the Luftwaffe bombs demolished over 3,000 houses and left over 56,000 damaged. Most of the damaged houses were left uninhabitable. So Belfast housing stock was severely affected by that. An official report published in December 41 stated that it was not untypical for 15 people to inhabit a terraced house in the bad area, or that meaning the slums part of Belfast at this time. And Harlot and Wolff suffered extensively during the May raids, thought to have suffered more physical damage during a single raid than any other sort of industrial space in Britain. A report published by the Northern Ireland government in June 1941 revealed that as much as 45% of shipbuilding capacity had been lost as a consequence of the German bombing raids, and it would sort of subsequently take a good 6 months to get that back to anywhere near the previous iteration. And just to conclude, some final damage images of Donegal, sort of York Street, Donegal Street. And here you can see Donegal Place, July 41, and Bridge Street before the Blitz, and then Bridge Street pretty much directly after the attack. Bridge Street by December 1941, and then sort of Bridge Street by 1943. So there's great opportunity for some of these images just to chart through pictorial means the sort of pre, during and post and the sort of salvage operation thereafter. So that it really is the end of my presentation. So thank you all for listening, and I'm going to pass swiftly on to Anne now.
Thanks, Janet. My name's Ann Donnelly, and I'm from Northern Ireland Screen's Digital Film Archive. So if you don't know what it is, this is the website. And if you were to go on that and do a search for World War II, you can see that we have a range of material that relates to that particular time. And if you were to look up the Blitz, you would see, again, different kind of a different search again. What I want to draw your attention to is that a lot of these are newsreel films, and today I'm actually not going to concentrate on newsreel films. I'm going to look at the material that UTV holds in relation to this particular period of the Blitz. And one of the reasons for that is that UTV material is stored in PRONI, and Northern Ireland Screen has a partnership with PRONI to look after this material. But I just wanted to make you aware that there is other material as well that you can look at on the website, and I'll put the links for these up into the chat box as well, so you can go and peruse them later on yourself.